All right, guys, welcome to the podcast. Glad to have you here. This is the Produce Common Sense podcast. This is the second episode. If you watched the previous one, you got to meet the rest of the family, my grandma, my mom, my Uncle Craig, and everybody else that's part of this operation. The idea of what we're doing here is to try and share common sense practices within agriculture and try and, cross the aisle, if you will, from left to right and front to back so that we can meet on common ground. There's a lot of things that we do within agriculture, within society that are a lot more common than we give ourselves credit for. And this one that I'm really interested in talking about, today's episode will be, why do we farm in the desert? Because everyone, looks at that and they're like, why are you farming in the desert? There's no water there. Is that really the right place to do it? And Derek Azevedo with Bulls Farming Company, Chief Operations Officer, is going to be with us. And he's in the middle of the San Joaquin Valley. We're both in desert, but he's in a really controversial part of the country that's very challenged with the use of water, with water policy, and just the political conflicts that exist between the urban and rural setting. And so I think it's a really great opportunity to have him here with us. I'm going to say right now that if you like what you're seeing, what you're hearing, and you want to keep learning along with me as I have these types of conversations, make sure that you subscribe so you can be notified of the next episode when it comes up. So Derek, you and I met because of LinkedIn, right? Is that a fair statement? I'm just curious.
No, I didn't. We were in the process of diversifying our crops a little bit, and I came across some of the content you were putting out there on fresh market onions, and I just kind of sent you a message and said, hey, if you're ever looking to put something together in the San Joaquin Valley, let us know. We'd be willing to entertain that. And I think 2 or 3 weeks later, Cannon and I flew up to visit you, and the week after that, you flew down to visit us, and we started going on a fresh market onion adventure.
An absolute adventure every step of the way. Yeah. And a plug for LinkedIn. I wish I was getting paid by them or something, but LinkedIn, like the networking is really cool. It doesn't always work. It's like anything else, but I sit in Derek's office right across from him. I sit there probably every other week, and we have conversations and talk about these fresh market onions and how we're going to, improve what we're doing and do a better job. And the sharing of information back and forth. Like, I've learned so much from them, and hopefully they've learned some from us too in our farming operation. And it's been virtual, but it's also been real and in person, and it's just extremely valuable. So that's why I thought it'd be great to have Derek on. So Derek, give us a little bit of background, how you ended up at Bulls Farming, your educational background. Like, what is it that you'd like people to understand about you before we start having a conversation?
Sure. Thanks, Shay. I grew up here in the Central Valley, a little bit north of Las Banas, in a small town called Gustine, which is western Merced County. We grew walnuts, almonds, and then a variety of tree crops. In addition to tree crops, a variety of forage crops for dairies and things like that. So I was on the ground, one of the farm kids on the ground, irrigating from the time I was 9, 10, 11, helping dad with whatever I could. And I think a lot of my work ethic came from that. I was very involved in livestock. I graduated. I got a agricultural scholarship to attend Kansas State University and participate on their livestock judging team. And that was a really cool experience, great school and a great experience to experience something out of California from an agricultural perspective and see how the Midwest, kind of does their thing. And then came back to California after graduating, was really involved in the processing industry, processing tomatoes specifically. And about 4 years ago, made the transition to Bulls Farming Company, where, Vice President, COO, and I oversee, work with our different crop partners and oversee all the crops we grow and figure out where to grow them and put that whole puzzle together of crop rotation and customer demand. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and talk about sustainability, right? Bulls started in 1858. Do I have that number right?
1858. That's right. Yeah. It started as a vertically integrated cow-calf operation at a butcher shop that expanded to a cow-calf operation. And at the peak of their land holdings, were in possession of 1.4 million acres that they put together on Spanish land grants and things like that. And it's a lot smaller footprint today, but it's some of the areas that we farm have been under the stewardship of the same family for 160 years, which is a pretty impressive number.
How many generations is that? That like
so
8?
It's on its 6th generation.
6th generation. Okay.
Yeah. But it's always interesting to put that in some historical time frame, like Lincoln was in the Senate, when the company started. The number 2 pencil was just patented. Those were some of the things that were happening.
That's crazy. That's really cool. So water has been, so the San Joaquin Valley is, in your area, I guess there's some wetlands, but in general, the San Joaquin is just a vast, vast desert. So to get to the crux of our conversation and what I want people to understand is what is it that makes sense about farming in the desert? What doesn't make sense? What are the challenges? But what are the benefits? If we're going to do a T chart here and put the positive, the good on one side, the negative on the other, what is it that we can communicate? And you specifically where you're at, maybe me where I am, as to the advantages of farming in the desert.
So I'll start with saying that California water is an incredibly complex subject that's multifaceted. And there's probably 9 to 15 people, that really understand the whole deal. And I am not one of those, Jay. So if I offend somebody, sometimes it's like there's so many different ways to look at it. It's really, really tough to synthesize that down into something simple. But what I will say is farming, from a geologic perspective, California has a really, really unique ability to provide water. If I'm trying to think of how to explain it, but if you think about a crop, the ideal situation for a crop is you give that crop everything it needs when it needs it. And water is one of the most important variables in that equation. And so if you get a chance to control how much water a crop gets and the time and how, you can really optimize the yield for that crop. Too much water and too little water are equally detrimental, at the extremes of either end. And so there's other places that get a lot more water in the form of rainfall, but that isn't necessarily valuable for growing crops because a lot comes with that: disease, insects, mold, all sorts of other pressures.
You actually make me think of the California, when we talk about onion production, just to stay specific to that, but if you go to New York or if you go to the Midwest, because of the high volumes of water, they have a lot more fungus pressure. So they have to apply way more fungicide. Their yields tend to be much lower, half, in fact, even though they have all the water. In fact, they don't irrigate at all, but their yields are 50% what ours are. And a lot of their, when you look at total carbon footprint, it'd be a really interesting thing to try and understand between the number of trips that the tractors have to go through the field and the additional fungicide and pesticide applications that are required based on where they're at. And so there's, in a nutshell, the advantage of the desert, right?
For sure. And California is in a really specific geographic region where we have the valley floor so close to the Sierra Nevada mountains that store so much water in the form of snowpack. And a lot of people think of California as a dry state, but it's not a dry state in the sense that Nevada is a dry state or Arizona is a dry state or New Mexico is a dry state. California has abundant water resources in the northern half of the state and very poor water resources in the southern half of the state. And so there was discussions way back in the 1920s, and to even prior to that, to move some of those water resources south. And so, the same developed water infrastructure that serves California agriculture also makes it possible for, San Francisco and Los Angeles and all these other places to exist.
Right. And that's something that we get that disconnect too sometimes. And the reality that, that the infrastructure in the city, that the water they're using to create their widgets, whatever that might be, whether it's, some sort of manufacturing or food processing or, there's still a lot of clothes made in the garment district in LA, for example, although they're not making their fabric there, but there's still a massive amounts of water that are required for industry. And industry uses the water in those cities. It's just not as visible, right? It's being delivered in a pipe underground, goes to the whatever that facility is that's creating whatever widget that they might be creating, and it goes out another tube after it's used, through the sewer system. And I think the visibility of the way that water is used in the desert also has an impact. When people see the water running through the canals, running into the fields, and it's green, people are like, okay, there's water being used there. If it's surface water, they know there's water being used there. And to me, I think that's part of maybe the perception too, as to, okay, well, the farmers are using all the water. Not that they're not using a lot, but it's more apparent.
Yeah, I think so. And sometimes I wonder, if folks in the urban areas, maybe a question for them would be like, how, if you just had all the water you could imagine, like, what else would you do with it? If you had, if every person in LA had 10 acre feet of water to use for the summer, like what would you do? There's only so much stuff you can do. And I think, at the end of the day, using, water to grow food, that's a gravity problem. It's like water is an essential for growing food, and we're not exporting that water. If you think about it, the water that we apply to our fields, yes, it helps to grow our onions, but it's also providing moisture that's helping promote all the the soil activity and the mycorrhizal fungi and all the other soil biology in our ecosystem. Some of that's going to fill aquifers, and so it's with water. The answer is never simple. I mean, I think that's the easiest way to approach it.
So where do you think as farmers, as agriculturists, as the users of water, what's our biggest failure been, and what is it that as an industry we could do different? Is there anything, like any low-lying fruit, like, hey, we've totally failed at X, Y, or Z? Is there anything comes to mind for you?
I don't know. That's a great question, Shay. I think the way we've used water has just evolved over time. There probably was more waste in the system previously, and a lot of our system was designed to kind of capture and recycle that waste, and that was the water that other folks used downstream. And so as we get more efficient with water, that's creating some shortfalls in the folks that relied on the tailwater that was coming down the pipe. I think one of the things, just as a group, I think the biggest miss for me is that water's just become this polarizing topic where it's like it's those people, I feel like it's all kind of part of agriculture in general. Like, people aren't, they just don't appreciate the real care, effort, and human that goes into optimizing all the resources that we have, water being one of them. And I think we've just really missed there. I would like to see more of our political figures just promoting all the good that agriculture does do, and not use water to something that divides us, but use water and agriculture is something that kind of brings people back together. I mean, food's been bringing humans together for 70,000 years. It's a pretty regular deal.
I think margins, when we talk about it, the idea a lot of the time is that for some reason in agriculture that the margins are massive. I'm not sure why margins are bad, like making a profit is a bad thing, but for some reason I think in agriculture, because of this, I don't want to call it the demonization of agriculture, but it almost is the demonization of agriculture, of everything that we're trying to do. We're trying to, rape and pillage the soil, or we're trying to do, all of these unethical things. And it's really, it's not that, but for some reason, at least myself as a grower, I feel like that happens a lot, which is why, we're having this conversation, which is why I'm on social media, which is why I'm trying to talk about what we do to try and really share a message about, what we're doing and why we're doing it. I don't know if you feel the same way, like if you feel like you have to defend yourself more than you would expect to. You kind of grew up in agriculture, so it's actually a better question to ask someone who's outside the industry that came in. But I grew up as like a really proud farm kid. And then I went out in the world and I'm like, whoa, like people don't think what I do is cool. Did you have that kind of an experience?
A little bit different, but I probably run into that a lot more now. And it is a little bit challenging. I saw it was some Facebook or Instagram post, and it was like, name your top 3 words that describe, farmers. And it was really interesting. The words that came out were like essentially some version of like dumb and rich. And I'm just like,
those two don't go together very often, but yeah. Okay.
And I think there's a lot of, but at the same time, like everyone who has some sort of political aspiration, like claims to be a farmer because farmers still a trusted voice. And it's just this weird,
Yeah, and there's always cultural practices that we can prove upon. In agriculture, the way that we use water today is dramatically different than it was 30 years ago. So, I mean, there are cultural practices that help us reduce water consumption, and there's certainly policy that becomes part of that. But I think generally speaking, especially when it comes to water, or other inputs, farmers are really respectful of following the rules. I for some reason, I think we get this like cowboy mentality, where we're always trying to figure out how to not do things right. And I think in general, we're doing things to the letter of the law to the extent that we can, all along the way. And water consumption is part of that. But it does require, changes in public policy. It does require cultural changes within the industry too, to get us there. So you talked for a second about like the cost of land and how land shouldn't come out of production, but there's, how many, I mean, I know the number is different and I don't even know the name of the law. But the new law associated with basically pulling water from wells, right? That is going to take acres. I mean, 500,000 to 1 million acres. Is that number figured out? Like how much farmland is going to be lost here with this new law and policy?
Sure. So that's SGMA, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. And essentially, there's lots of other states that have very highly regulated groundwater restrictions. California was not one of those. And so, for most of it, and we're talking south of the deltas, South San Joaquin Valley for the most part for this discussion. But, if you look at historical deliveries, from 1950 to 1990, except for the drought of 77, ag was given 100% of its water allocation, and it was delivered at 100% in all of those years, except for one, I believe. I could be off on a year or two, but it's pretty close. So you have 40 years of secure water deliveries on the west side of the San Joaquin Valley. And then in the 90s, that's when a lot of these, environmental legislation began layering on, and it began reducing the water that was that was allocated to the west side, and there were some droughts and stuff throughout those years too. But these days, a 15 or 20 or 30% allocation is a big deal, and so in order to offset that water use and keep farming, farmers turned to groundwater instead of surface water, and the wells got deeper and more plentiful, and so essentially there was probably some need to step in and have some sort of regulation on that, not just for farms, but there was nothing to stop cities from buying some ground and sinking some big wells and shipping water down to themselves and all that other stuff. And so
right.
So that there's nobody knows, but there are estimates that anywhere from 500,000 to 1 million acres could be taken out of farming production once SGMA is fully implemented.
I mean, we're the same way over here. Like we have these challenges with in the Treasure Valley with water overall. This is one of the first short years across the spectrum. Like usually we have different, there's different irrigation districts. Some are fine, some are not. And I think some of the things, as I watch what's happening within agriculture and this land coming out of production and that potential, is it really comes down to who it affects. It's kind of easy to continue to, impact others. It's when it impacts us personally that we start to, consider what the policies are. And I am with you. I'm not against the policies. It's just at some point you take a step back and you're like, okay, well, what can we do differently? Is it really worth pulling those kind of acres out of production? Is it really worth, not having that water available for whatever reason it might be, whether it's infrastructure or production, agriculturally speaking, or if it's industry within the city, I guess is, kind of the way that I look at it. I appreciate your time. Thanks for being on. Hopefully there's a few nuggets in here between our conversation back and forth that other people can take away from this. I think the main thing for me, and I know Derek, you're on the same page here, is we really, as farmers, want people to know, that we're trying to do the right thing. We're willing to follow the rules. But sometimes these rules get really, really complicated and they're hard to follow. It's hard to do everything that's asked of us. And I think that's where we are in agriculture today. It's just that cumulative effect, just like with the water on top of agriculture and what we are required to do, that's making it harder and harder to deliver the food that everyone needs. So again, thank you. Thanks for being on. So I just want to thank Derek for being on with me. Derek is a great guy that works for a phenomenal company. Bolles is really trying to do the right thing. Canon Michael, the sixth generation in that family operating that farm, really does some amazing things. He's working on some regenerative projects, and he's also, constantly trying to invite the public, the policymakers and the politicians to come and see what they're doing on his farm. And that is what it takes for us to move the needle, to share what we're doing. We have nothing to hide. We love to improve our processes and to share what we do. There'll be more like this. Hopefully you've enjoyed listening to kind of this candid, open conversation between Derek and myself about vegetable production in the desert. And you'll want to come back and hear the next one. Like and subscribe and follow along. We'll catch you later. Thank you.